readers. My name is Charity, the host of Booktrovert Reader podcast. I'm introverted, but willing to talk about fantasy books. On this podcast, I'll do book reviews, author interviews, and fantasy book discussions. Come join me every week as I explore new realms and talk to amazing people. Hello, readers. This is Charity, your host of Booktrovert Reader. I invited a very special guest with me today. Her name is Thea Guanzon. She wrote The Hurricane Wars. I fell in love with this book so much. I had to ask her on once I finished reading it because I was hitting that slump, and it just took me immediately out of it. So I'm so glad she got time to be able to talk to me and about her book and just introduce yourself and The Hurricane Wars.
Hi, Charity. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that you liked my debut novel. Such an honor to be here on this podcast. So, hi, listeners. My name is Thea Guanzon. I'm from the Philippines, and I wrote The Hurricane Wars, which is the first book in a romantasy trilogy, which is coming this October 3rd from Harper Voyager.
I fell in love with this because it's like my first sci-fi fantasy that I picked up, and I thought it was a really amazing blend between the two genres. And then of course, the Hurricane Wars, I saw some people's like, oh, I don't know if it's about the hurricanes, but I'm like, that would be a good question to ask. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, it was a combination of many things. I grew up reading fantasy, and it was these books that inspired me to create my own world. And I wanted to write my own spin on my favorite trope, which is enemies to lovers. And I wanted them to start out as like actual knife to the throat, I hate you and I want to kill you enemies, and go from there. And then I also drew inspiration from the history of my people, our many struggles for freedom in the face of colonization and dictatorship. And yeah, there's not a lot of hurricanes in the first installment, but I hope that you guys will find still exciting, and I promise there will be more like stormy battles in the next two books, because the first one was all about setup and stuff.
And I highly encourage everyone to go ahead, look up this book, read the synopsis of this book. It's basically about two people. One's from the Night Empire, and one is actually fighting against Night Empire. And she actually wields light magic, which was killed off a long time ago because of the shadow magic users. There's like a lot of mechanics when it comes to like the boats, the ships. I thought it was very fascinating, and the enemies to lovers with chef's kiss.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you like that. That was the most important part for me, like making sure that their relationship was fascinating and compelling, and also trying to make sure that it developed in an organic manner. I think that's part of the reason that the final draft took such a long time to create, because my editors and I were going over everything with a fine-tooth comb, like making sure that their interactions hit every nuance, every beat, and that it was like capable of producing a satisfying payoff for the readers.
It was still like at the end. I'm not going to talk about it, but you left me hanging.
Sorry.
I mean, I've talked to so many people who read this. I'm like literally hunting people down to talk about this book. And a lot of times it's just such a slow burn and such an enemies to lover, true enemies to lover. They did not like each other at the very end. That's what I loved so much about it. And then it actually, like you said, organically came together, and I felt every fiber of that being. So, okay, what inspired you to write a sci-fi fantasy book in the first place? I know I've been following you for a while. You've been doing Star Wars. That's amazing. I love that. So tell me about what inspired you to write a sci-fi fantasy book.
Well, so when I was conceptualizing this novel, when I was creating this world, I knew that I wanted their main mode of transportation to echo indigenous Filipinos' main mode of transportation, which was basically boats. Like, I wanted them to use these vessels so that the designs were modeled after the warships, the outrigger canoes of my ancestors, which was what we used to travel between islands, because the Philippines is an archipelago, and also to sail to other countries to conduct trade and things like that. So I wanted them to use the boats, but I also wanted to cut down on their travel time like within the world. So I was like, okay, let's just make these things fly.
Uh-huh.
And so I had to build the magic system around the boats. Like how can they use magic to make these boats fly? And so that's how you get the airships, which were powered by wind magic, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how you also get the storm ships, which are basically the airships that have the storm magic built into them to become
Mm-hmm.
weapons of mass destruction. Thus the name of the conflict being the Hurricane Wars.
Now that I'm going back, would you go into more of the different aspects of magic? Because the first book really goes into the shadow and the light magic. So, and there
Yeah.
was a lot more, and there was dragons introduced, and I'm like, what? I'm like, okay. Do you have plans on further going into those other areas of your magic system?
In the next book, probably I will be expanded a little bit more, but basically, the premise of this region, of this world, is that the other forms of magic, the people who can cast the other forms of magic, have basically just up and left, and so it's only the shadow users and the light users who used to, or it's only the shadow users and the light users who live in this area of the
Mm-hmm.
world before the shadow users wipe the light users out. Basically, the magic in this world, it's divided into different elements. So there's light, shadow, fire, storm, water, wind.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to build upon the idea that magic is it's like a finite resource in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
because they tap the magic from these nexus points,
Mm-hmm.
or these locations where the magic can break through from the other dimension. And it's a very random thing. It's not constantly always activated, so
Mm-hmm.
you just have to get lucky and just
You're
wait.
right.
Yes, and the magic is stored in these aether crystals, which is what they use to power their technology. And I wanted to build upon this idea of, like, magic being a finite resource, because I think that here in the Philippines, our lives are intrinsically tied, for better or for worse, with our natural resources, with the
Mm-hmm.
land. In my hometown, there are these few months which are known as dead season, because
Okay.
this is the time after harvest, so you can't plant yet, and the fields are barren, and there's no work for the plantation workers. So, yeah, so everyone has to sort of tighten their belts and
Mm-hmm.
just get through it. So I wanted to build this world where people had to take care of the land and they had to
Mm-hmm.
respect.
I love how you're incorporating a lot of your culture in this book. And that's why I'm so glad to invite you on, because now you get to like put two and two together to experience your world into a book.
It's actually so funny because the very, very first draft of this book, it was not rooted in Southeast Asian culture at all.
Mhm.
Like, I think it just didn't occur to me that I could base off of my people's culture, because I grew up reading Western style fantasy.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Like, I just didn't think I was allowed. But
Oh.
the world building of that very first draft, it felt very dry, very generic, and I was not
Mhm.
invested in it at all. And it was actually my agent, Taule, who read the draft, and then she suggested, "Why don't you make it Southeast Asian?" And after that, I was like, "Oh yeah!" Like, I didn't know that I was allowed to do this, but let's go. And I think that's how the world really came to life, when I decided to use the stories of my ancestors and the stories of Southeast Asia.
Oh, I love that. All right, pausing real quick, and I'm promising we'll get back to it. I love every one of your readers, and I'm in need of your support to help this podcast flourish. Here are the few ways you can help. 1. Subscribe. Subscribing to your favorite platform ensures that you get the latest episodes right away. 2. Rate and review. Leave me a glowing review and rating on your favorite podcast platform of your choice. Your feedback not only is exciting to me, but also helps other fantasy enthusiasts discover this podcast. 3. Share. Spread the word of Booktrovert Reader podcast. Share these episodes on social media and recommend this book podcast to your friends. Sharing this podcast creates an amazing community of listeners just like you. Make sure to check out the description below to find all my links to my social media. 4. Support through subscriptions. Your support helps me continue making content. In the description below, you will find how to support me on this podcast. By subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing, it will help Booktrovert Reader podcast get in front of other readers like you. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and make sure to tell me your favorite fantasy book. All right, readers, back to the episode. Getting into the magic system, what brought that concoction to your brain about how to create this and bring it to life in your book?
I think that, well, I knew that I wanted there to be light and shadow because
Right.
that light versus dark is also one of my favorite tropes aside from enemies to lovers, and I just really like the aesthetic of it.
Right.
And then I decided that, well, it's kind of weird if there are just like two forms of magic in this world. In order to make it feel more lived in, and in order to make the technology more plausible, I had to create like other elements. So I guess in a sense, I was also inspired by Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah, but I wanted to include a storm component, like lightning, thunder, stuff like that, because I think it's also a daily fact of life here in Southeast Asia, dealing with all these devastating storms and helping one another rebuild. So I feel like it wouldn't have been an authentically Southeast Asian story without at least like the threat of oncoming storms, because we're in the Pacific Ring of Fire. So yeah, we got like loads of typhoons. Actually, just last month, this August, we had 3 consecutive typhoons. So that was yeah, one after the other.
boy.
They all came tearing through here.
I for a time I lived in over 10 years in Florida, and we get some of
Florida,
it.
yes, I have heard that about Florida.
Yeah, we can get it. I wouldn't say it's as bad as the Caribbean and all those
Oh yeah,
areas,
yeah.
but I can imagine that's why I loved it so much, because I'm like, I get it. So tell me about your two main characters. We got Prince Alaric, and I love to say her name, Talzarin.
Taliesin,
Taliesin.
yes,
Taliesin is the light wielder, and
yes.
Prince Alderic is the shadow magic. He is the heir to the Night Emperor's throne, and I love the dynamic of that. So tell me about those two characters, who they are, and all the great stuff with it.
Okay, so Alaric is, as you mentioned, he's the prince. He's the heir to the Night Empire. He's very ruthless. He's very haughty, like very prim and proper in a sense. And he's also really mean. Like all his life, he only saw his own value as a weapon, and there wasn't really much space for anything else because he grew up fighting a war. And then there's Taliesin, who is an orphaned soldier, and she's stubborn, she's feral, she's and she carries like a lot of anger inside her for
Right.
like for everything that happened. And so these two, they clash on the battlefield, and from the moment that they meet, they loathe each other, and they know that the war cannot end without one of them killing the other, because of their respective magic and how these two magic abilities oppose each other. But then something happens. Something happens that brings them closer together, and then they realize that they have to work together to defend their world against this new threat, which is far greater than the hurricane wars. And so yeah, that's where the fun begins.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention that twist in the story, because that's what really hooked me, and it was so amazing. And I don't want to even talk, because I just want people to read it for themselves at this point. I thought that was an interesting twist for that storyline to change like that, and it just instantly like, oh, that made sense why they're gravitated towards each other all of a sudden, and they had to be with each other. Forced proximity as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Also,
yeah.
another favorite trope of mine, forced proximity.
Yeah, girl, I'm so you took your favorites and really like honed in on them because I remember reading the whole enemies to lovers and sometimes it's instant lust. I call it instant lust and I didn't get that at all. It was a real enemies to lovers, slow burn romance. So
Oh, I'm so happy it worked for you. I had a lot of fun writing it actually. But now I'm working on book two, and like there's way more angst, and I'm like, why did I do this to myself? Why did I do this to these two people?
you are gonna tear me apart. It was hard enough getting through it. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. Like, will they? Will not. Not. It's really hard to surprise me. So I was on the edge of my seat the whole time and I had to get to the end. And now you left me at the end and I'm like, okay, when is book two? Okay, so we got to know a little bit of the characters and everything. Will say there's a lot of world building in the beginning of your book. I would say 35%. There's a lot of world building. How did you approach your world building in this world?
So there was actually more world building
Oh.
before the final draft, and my editors were the one who sort of trimmed it down. Like they found more organic ways for it
Mhm.
to be introduced, for elements to be introduced into the story. But yeah, I think it's a bit hard at first because like you have to get a lot of names and concepts straight.
Mhm.
But yeah, I kind of approached it like I wrote the story first. I wrote like the plot first, the interactions
Mhm.
between the characters, and I developed that dynamic first, and then I went back and I filled in the world building.
Okay.
I started when I went back, I started answering like, okay, how do they move through this world? How did they make things happen? So yeah, it was a lot.
So I'm trying to get it because one question sometimes I ask is like if you're a plotter, a prankster, it's a discovery. Like, so you built out your characters first, and then you attack the outline of your story, basically.
I don't outline. I don't know how to outline. I'm actually very I'm actually very impressed with authors who are so organized. Like they write down their characters, they make outlines, and I think that because of this, like they write really tightly plotted and very well contained stories.
Hmm.
I don't know how to do that, but I'm trying. And with book two, no, I didn't have time. Like with book two, I didn't have energy to make an outline. I just did what I usually
Uh-huh.
did. Like I just dove in and started writing because that's what I do. Like I just go in and then basically just it's basically just it's basically no thoughts, just vibes for the entirety of the first draft, and then I just let my editors go over it and say, okay, this is what you need to change and stuff like that. This is how you put more thought into it.
Oh, I love that. I that's the first time I heard it that way. Just because it's always good to get that second perspective on your work. It's good to kind of go back to it. And what's
Yeah,
your
yeah.
what's your favorite part about writing the story or fantasy in general?
My favorite part, I would have to say, so ever since I was a kid, I've always had like an overactive imagination. Like I'd
Mm-hmm.
get lost in my own head. Like I would spend half my time in the real world and half my time in like daydreams.
Right.
So so what I love about fantasy is that it's an outlet for my imagination. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like I love creating all these new worlds, all these new concepts, but the genre lets me do all of that while still allowing me to capture and portray the human experience. So I think there's something very magical about that.
What would you say is the hardest part about writing fantasy and how did you learn to overcome that?
The world building.
Seems like everyone's response.
Yeah, because I don't know, like I'm still learning how to balance the info dump,
Hmm.
or rather, I'm still learning to balance how to give information and move the story along without making it seem like one big info dump.
Hmm.
I think that's a constant process that you always have to be working on as a fantasy writer, and I am very much looking forward to the day that I get better at it.
Would you say it got a little easier now that you got a lot of the world building in the first book done,
Oh
or did
yeah,
you
yeah,
find?
for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, when I started writing the second book, I was like, thank God everything is out. Like the facts were out of the way. Now I can go back. Now I can go back to no thoughts, just vibes.
Just to the storytelling. It might be too early to ask this, but do you have other ideas that you're considering on other fantasy books? Are you focusing just on your sci-fi Star Wars portion of it?
Oh, do you mean like do I have ideas for like a new series?
Yeah.
Or no, I have this the next project that I want to work on. I want it to be like I can use the term like urban fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I want it to be in a contemporary setting here in the real
Okay.
world, but I want like magic in it, and of course, I want to set it in like here in the Philippines.
Right. Which is not something you see very often, and that's why I'm looking for the Southeast Asian inspired ones, just because it's not a cultural norm.
I think that Southeast Asia as a
Yeah.
whole, it exists outside of the global perception of what Asia is. I think that people it's normally overlooked when you think about Asia, but it's very
Mm-hmm.
unique. Like this is a very unique region, and we have such diverse cultures and such intriguing folklore and so many interesting stories. And yeah, I hope that we can read more Southeast Asian fantasy in the future.
You're a debut author, so
Mhm.
you got in with Harper Voyagers. What would your advice be for authors getting into looking into big publishing?
Well, I guess my best advice would probably be to just first of all just work on your craft. Writing is a constant process. You evolve as a writer the more you write. So
Mm-hmm.
just try to write whenever you can and practice, practice, practice so that you can write the best story that you can. You can't underestimate the importance of having community.
Okay.
Like, yeah, forging friendships with other writers, and yeah, it's really been amazing. Like that's what's really helped me during this debut year. Like I have a Discord server with
Mm-hmm.
some other authors, and that's been great because like you have people to vent to who understand
Mm-hmm.
what's happening, and people who can cheer you on. So yeah, so I would advise like aspiring writers to start looking into building community on social media, forums, stuff like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
what else? Like I think that it's also important to not take rejection personally.
Right.
Yeah, like this was like I think that you just have to think of it in terms of like when you submit to an agent or an editor and they say that it's not their thing, that's really
Mm-hmm.
just it. Like you're not a failure as a person, you're not a failure as an author. It's just that you submitted to someone who did not find your writing to be to their taste, and
Mm-hmm.
taste is subjective. So yeah, just keep looking and never give up, and one of these days your story is going to find its way into the hands of someone who will really champion it and who will really believe in it.
You talked about community.
Hmm.
Who, other than like on social media with other authors, would you say that did you talk to anyone in your family or anything that kind of helped you push this book out or encouraged you, or you kept it a secret this whole time?
Okay. Okay, well, so I'm from an Asian family, and that I think that's one like global Asian norm that there's no money in the arts.
Okay.
I actually don't think that my parents thought I was having like I don't think that they thought this was a real job
Oh,
until
okay.
yeah, until the announcement started coming in, and my dad saw me on Google search results, and he was like, "Oh, okay, then maybe this is legitimate." Yeah, so okay, so my immediate family, my parents are doctors and my two
Uh-huh.
siblings are also doctors. I'm the only non-doctor in the family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then everyone else, my aunts and my uncles, they're either doctors or lawyers. So
Okay.
yeah, it's been, I think they're having a hard time wrapping their head around the fact that that I am neither a doctor nor a lawyer. But they've been supportive, and they say that they'll order my book and stuff like that. Although like there's a bit of spice towards the end of the
Uh-huh.
book,
Yeah.
and I live in fear of my mom and my dad reading that. Like I want to intercept the copies that they order and just rip out those pages.
They get together, don't worry. It doesn't matter how.
Oh yeah, that reminds me of another thing that I want to tell aspiring authors. Even if your family thinks there's no money in it, just try to do it. Just go for it and do what you love, so that so that you can be happy, and that so
Hmm.
that you can pursue your dreams. It's worth it in the end.
Right. Right. I totally get that. So you're going full time into this, right? Into writing now?
Yeah, I was on the pre-med track of many years ago, and I wasn't happy with it. Like I was just going along with what everyone else wanted for me, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it just really was not my thing. So I quit that, and then I switched to an international studies degree, and I thought for a while that that was going to be my career track, but then the pandemic happened, lockdown
Mm.
happened, and
Everything
I had
happened.
this yeah, I had this identity crisis about what do I really want to achieve, like what do I want to do with my life. And that was when like I realized that life is short. I might as well pursue my passion, like what I'm
Mm.
really interested in. And so yeah, so I we got the book deal. I quit my office job, and I've been a writer ever since.
I love that journey because it's so important to pursue what you're really passionate about, and and you really took that to a whole new level, and I
Yeah,
love that.
but I recognize that there's privilege in it as well. There's privilege in being able to
Hmm.
pursue what you really want. I think that there are a lot of aspiring authors who are not able to write as much as they want to, who are not able to work on their books because of their circumstances in life, like they have to work full time, things like that. So I think that that comes with that's part of like building community. Like we just really have to support each other and help each other any way that we can.
We're wrapping up. Just
Hmm.
say where we can find your books, where we can find you on social media. I'll be posting all this on the show notes, so definitely follow her and follow the updates. By the time where this podcast goes up, the book will be very soon published. So you can pre-order your book. And I missed the special editions, and I'm beating myself up on that.
I'm so sorry. No,
I
I think
know.
the Barnes and Noble edition is still in stock.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I've been shopping
Okay.
and lurking on that store, so I'm gonna go to it.
Okay, so you can
So
find
yeah.
the Hurricane Wars wherever fine books are sold, starting October 3rd in the US and October 12th in the UK. And then you can follow me on my socials. It's all Thea G Writes on Instagram, Twitter, sorry, X, TikTok.
X.
Yeah, and then my website that has all the information on my books and pre-order links and stuff like that. It's all at theaguanzon.com.
Well, thank you for joining me today, readers. Definitely go check her out, follow her. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thank you, readers, for listening to my podcast on fantasy books. I hope you're enjoying the content and finding it helpful in discovering new books to read. If you have a moment, please consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Booktrovert Reader to stay updated on new episodes and other book-related content. Thank you again for your support, and happy reading!